Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Leaders of Digital Learning 2021 event with Tablet Academy Scotland. I am Heather Rhodes. I am a music and music technology teacher in South Lanarkshire Council, and I'm here today to talk you through the Chrome Music Lab and the shared piano, which are features of Google. I'm just going to start off with a little introduction about what the Chrome Music Lab is and what the shared piano features are and how to find them. I'm going to take you through this step by step, so I'm hoping you can follow along if you'd like to at the same time. Just going to share my screen with you so that I can show you the following stages. Give me 2 seconds. Brilliant. So, within the Chrome Music Lab and the different features of it, so the easiest way to do this is to go into Google and to type in the Chrome Music Lab. This is an experiment by Google. Basically, they are different programs and features that are created by a whole load of different creators. And the Chrome experiments have a range of things to do with art projects. There's obviously the Chrome Music Lab inside of this, but there's also a whole load of different features that you can have a look at that might be able to support learners in a different way. If I go into, for example, into the experiments with Chrome, I'll show you just a few examples before I talk about the different features of the music stuff that we're going to talk about today. In experiments with Google, some of these are in beta stages until they find out, for example, how much interest is involved in these, and then obviously they push them out. But if you look at just some of the featured collections, for example, we have things for AI, celebrating creativity in AI. We also have things to do with arts and culture. Chrome experiments are also here, which is things to do with, like, for example, creating coding. There's things to do with, for example, scanning sequencers using JavaScript, making music in real time with movements, which is a really interesting one. And then down the bottom, we've got some other kind of visual aspects, for example, the shared piano ones in there that I'm going to be talking about. And that obligatory, if anyone remembers, was a couple of months back or even a year back that game Flappy Bird ended up in there. So you might want to have a look through the different experiments with Chrome just to see what's out there, to see if there's a different perspective that you can maybe put on your learning and teaching, especially without this asynchronous and synchronous digital learning that's coming in because of COVID. So if I now go back to the Chrome Music Lab, the Chrome Music Lab on Google has a section which has now, it did have 13 different types of programs involved. Now I think there's 14 because they've now, or they should have now added in this shared piano feature and function into there. So the Chrome Music Lab is found just by searching through the Chrome Music Lab and then opening up here. And you can see that it's a very interactive, it's a very visual platform for learners to be able to have a look at. And I find it very visually appealing. When you're sending pupils to a website, for example, or a task for their learning, I often find that pupils automatically tend to get disengaged if it isn't interactive and visually appealing. But as you can see from the Chrome Music Lab, it's very bright. It's got lots of animations, lots of pictures involved, and lots of clickable things for pupils to be able to access. As you can see, they all come in little squares. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we've now got that added extra last one in there. Okay. I'm going to pop in the chat box a list of resources that I'm going to talk through. Now, these were a list of resources that I've created. I am more than happy for you to go and use these if you think that they'll be useful for you, or to modify along the way. In here, in this link, if you give me 2 seconds, I will pop it into the chat box for you. In this link here, there are a list of documents. For example, I will show you here. In here, I've got different listening activities for music. I've got different tasks based at different levels based on elements of the music curriculum. So, for example, the first 3 were to do with the listening course. This one here is to do with advanced tarot music, a compositional and listening element that I've created, as well as some other resources and things that I've found off the internet. I'm going to share this folder with you into the chat box, and if you want to have a look through this at the same time, then I'm more than welcome for you to do so, and I'll talk through each of these elements and how each of these elements links into the different sections of the Chrome Music Lab and how potentially you could put these into your teaching practice. I've just popped that link into the chat box for you, so you should be able to access that link from in there. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at some of the features and functions. So I'm going to start off with the shared piano function. Shared piano function only came out, I think, around about June time. It wasn't, excuse my notifications, it wasn't a feature that was originally built into the Chrome Music Lab. It was an added on experiment that happened, and because of its links to the various different types of experiments which are within this, they've added this section in. This was originally in beta form back when I did a demonstration with Ian Vosser, and we had a bit of a fun play about with it, and I would encourage you to do this as well, and I'll pop the link to the shared piano that I'm on at the moment so you can join if you'd like to have a little bit of fun. So within the shared piano, I'm thinking that this could potentially be used in a distance learning approach. It might also be a feature that you could utilise in the music classroom if you had, for example, devices that pupils were being able to use. This shared piano requires no login, it requires no install, and it's a multi-platformed device. If I just give you a couple of functions and features about this, and then I'll give you a demonstration that I did with one of my music teacher friends who's up in Aberdeenshire. We did this the other day as a wee demonstration for you to show you what it can do. As you can obviously see, it's the exact same as what we would utilise a piano in the classroom. Obviously now we've got that interactive feature where you, for example, can use your mouse to click on the notes. Or you can use your keyboard. This took a little bit of experimentation to find out which notes related to which part of the keyboard that's on the screen. But I found out that the vast majority of the keys along the middle line of your keyboard, so that's A to L, kind of fit into that more or less an octave range. And then your black notes at the top, your chromatic notes, kind of follow that pattern that you'd expect them to do. So if A was C, W is C sharp, S is D, E is E flat or D sharp, and D is E. Now that's obviously a little bit confusing in terms of the letters that we're expecting them to know in music, but that way you've still got some interactiveness with the keyboard side of things, and also you have, for example, your mouse side of things as well. Like I said, this piano is multi-device. You can use it on, it's multi-platformed. So you would be able to, for example, if you had touchscreen devices such as a phone or a tablet or even a graphics tablet, you'd be able to use in conjunction with this shared piano here. I think I've got my pen here, so I'm not sure whether or not if I can. I'm not sure if this is connected. No, I've unconnected it. Good start. But you should be able to use any sort of platform in order to be able to use the shared piano. I can also, which I've used, and I think I still have plugged it, yes I do, is I also have a MIDI keyboard. Now I know, for example, from the music technology course, these are the MIDI keyboards that we use. These are AKI Professionals LPK25s. And this again required no additional install, no programs to be installed. It was basically a plug and play device. And on here, obviously, the exact same notes replicate exactly onto the piano that's on the screen. And we also have 2 buttons on my little MIDI keyboard, which are, for example, to go up an octave or to go down an octave. So having those functions on this keyboard allows me, even though I've only got a limited range, to be able to use the whole, all of the range that's on the keyboard in front. A couple of extra things you can do with this. If you notice down at the bottom, we have a little options menu. So you can change this, for example, to be a drum kit, a drum machine, marimba, strings, piano, synth and woodwind. So again, we're allowing that personalisation and choice into the description of what we want instruments to sound like. And it's also allowing pupils that extra bit of freedom to make keyboards sound different. If you think about, for example, National 5 performance, we are looking potentially for it not just to be on the keyboard sound, but to be on a different sounding instrument to add to the performance. We also have in the settings, again, this will help for differentiation. In here, you're allowing, for example, to decide how big is your keyboard. So if you only want pupils to be, for example, in a shorter range, you can have that set to 2 octaves. And that's all the notes that they will receive. Take a unit of work that probably most people do, whether it's in broad general education, whether it's first, second or third year. If you take, for example, the blues, jazz and blues course, we tend to use a lot of improvisation, and we tend to start off with just getting certain pupils to use certain notes. Obviously, once they start getting a bit more familiar with that, we then, for example, tell them, right, you don't just have to stick to those 8 notes in the middle. You're now allowed to use any of the notes. You should know the patterns, you should know each of the note letters and note names, and then you can expand it out into a variety of different octaves and ranges. So having that octave setting on that shared piano is a great function. And you can go all the way from auto, which obviously was what it was on before. You can have it to 2 octaves, all the way up to 7, and I'm pretty sure that 8 is the standard that's there. Also down the bottom, another differentiation feature which might be useful is to have the note names on the piano. So if I click show, you'll notice that all of the white notes and the notes that I've already played are now notified or now identified by the note letters that are now sitting above. Now, I think that's great, especially for example of differentiation, back to that building gaps, building bridges, building knowledge and understanding for those pupils, being able to take those on and take them off depending on their ability levels. And you can also, for example, put in the different types of notes at the top, and it also really nicely gives you the options or whether you want that to be a flat or whether you want that to be a sharp. So for example, if we were doing the blues scale, I would probably take off the C sharp. I would probably make that one an E flat. I would make that one an F sharp, and I'd make that one a B flat. And if you now look at my keyboard, you would now be able to identify, for example, which of the black notes that you'd want pupils to be able to play. And it also, I can't take off, I'm not sure if I can take off, I can actually. So for example, in the blues scale, if I take off these extra notes, I'm allowed to say, those are the only notes that I'd like you to use for this performance. I don't want you to use any of the other notes. And again, I can go back down to 2 octaves alone and just say, those are the notes that I want you to use, and I want you to improvise or play around, which I think is a fantastic feature. I think, for example, you would also be able to use this potentially maybe in regard to a similar kind of tuned percussion idea, to say that obviously tuned percussion keyboards are using the same layouts and the same types of notes, but being able to utilise that to take away the notes that you don't want pupils to use, for them to be able to even see the patterns that's created by that, and being able to really personalise that piano to the style of music or the piece of music that those pupils are playing. In here also you've got things to do with emojis. I'm not entirely sure what the emojis part is, unless it's the emojis, for example, like the little characters that you get allocated. The note trails, if you can see, for example, that above, you can see all the notes that I've already played. You can turn that off if you don't want the notes, for example, the lengths and the coloured boxes to appear at the top. And then, for example, you can see that my MIDI device has already been connected to this. I haven't changed any settings. I haven't done anything else for it. It's automatically recognised. Okay. So that's more or less the features. The features are pretty simple. They're pretty intuitive. What you can also do in here, for example, is see on the left, very left-hand side, there's a big play button. And what you can actually do is play back your performance. If I use the scroll button just now and scroll back up to the top of this, you'll notice that all the music and stuff plays that I've played. And if I now play, it will go through everything I've done and stop at the very end. It's also holding the notes on for the same length of time that I held them on for, and you can see that by the coloured bars. And then you've got the option, for example, if your piece of music's really long, to go back to the live version, that wee bubble that popped up at the very bottom. You can also notice that most of the Google applications, for example, Sheets, Slides, Docs, if somebody joins who doesn't have an account, they'll tend to be allocated an anonymous animal. So you can notice, for example, here that I think that's a bear. That bear, every time I play, for example, that bear pops up, so you can see who that icon is. Obviously, this is anonymous because it requires no login, so you won't be able to tell, for example, that which pupils which, unless obviously you ask them to, for example, note down or explain which animal person they've been. What you'll also notice is you have a room, for example, like identifiable link, like a nickname you get in Google Meets. And if I copy that link, I'm going to pop it in the chat. If anybody is obviously watching this live, if you want to even pop in so that you can experience what this looks like, you'll also notice that if more people join, in fact, I'll join on another tab. Hold on. So if I now join, fingers crossed, you can now see that 2 people are now in. So I've got another tab open on here, and you can also notice the time difference, the time delay between the two. So on this one here, that's 0.5 milliseconds. And obviously I can see now that another couple of people have joined me. There's a rabbit and a whale, and I can tell the difference in time between the two. And what we can do is we can have a little play about. So if there's my blues scale, if anybody would like to play the blues scale, I'll play along, and what you can see is you'll be able to see each person moving at different times. So that's on my cat one, I think. So you can see above as well, you'll be able to see who's joined me. They'll be able to see live exactly what I'm doing, even if I'm not on a Meet, for example, or hosting through YouTube. You'll be able to have that interactivity between the 2 people at the same time. So all 4 of us, wherever we are able to join and collaborate at the same time. It might be good for a wee experiment to do at home, for example, with a live demonstration, or it could be used as a kind of really small group performance. And I'm going to give you an example of that. You'll notice down in the very right-hand corner, there's that big tick button, lovingly says save. And I love this because when I click save, it gives me a unique link. And what you can ask pupils to do, for example, on whatever platform you're using, whether it's Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom, you'd be able to ask those pupils to give you that link, and everything that has been played above will then come back to you. So I'm going to leave this link just now. So it's just a heads up for people that if you do want to have a go at this, that's perfectly fine. It's now not going to show on YouTube, so you can have a go by yourself. So if I now close this, I have one that I did with my friend Jack the other day, and I'm going to show you that little video if you give me 2 seconds just till I find it. In that video that I did with Jack, I was able to, for example, put on a backing track play along with the backing track with Jack, and we created a little song based on the 12-bar blues. I'm just trying to see if I can find it. I thought I was really organised. Here it is. What I'll do is I'll just play this little video for you that me and Jack created. I'm just having a wee jam with Jack Christie at the moment, who's on my other screen on Google Meet, who's currently up in Aberdeenshire, hailing from the Peterhead Academy side of things. We're just going to do a really short demonstration using shared piano, and at the moment we're just going to do a wee 12-bar blues, just to demonstrate the features that shared piano has and how it can work remotely. As you can see down the bottom, thanks Jack. As you can see down the bottom, you can see that there's 3 people in this shared piano at the moment. I'm currently the dragon, and Jack's on 2 devices. He's on his Mac, I think, and his phone at the moment. So you can see that there's 2 wee animal icons down the bottom. If Jack plays something just now on 1 inch or one of his, you can see that Jack's coming up as the elephant. So that's Jack's Mac. And if Jack plays on his phone, he should be coming up as the bear. Rotational issues, hold on. Yeah, here we go. So Jack's the bear now. And if I play, so Jack's using touchscreen devices, he's using a touchscreen on his phone, he's using the keyboard on his computer, and I've got a MIDI keyboard plugged in. So we're now using 3 different touch devices in order to create this collaboration. I should pop up as the dragon, so you can see that those are the notes, and you can see the notes appear above. We're just going to put on a 12-bar blues backing track just now, so that we can play along with this. Jack's going to play chords on his. I'm going to play the tune or the melody on top, and we're just going to give it a wee jam just so you can see what it looks like. So here is our lovely So you can kind of get the idea about how we've gone about doing this, and this could potentially be something that you'd want to do in class time, and it will record and save back. If I just close this just now, what I also did was I also saved the link, and I've got the link just bookmarked up here. So if I open this link, this is the link that me and Jack created, and if you notice, you can still see all of the notes that we've played. So I could, for example, click to turn the sound on and play through. So we played on this Jamboard, or this shared piano, sorry, for 7.5 minutes. And I can listen to everything that we did. So that's probably the start of our little jamming session there, probably, unless we've just kind of mocked about. So you'd be able to hear everything along the way just by having that the tick button on the share one. And obviously now that I've saved that link, I've now got the option, for example, to go back in and share that recording as well with that link there. I think this is a really, really, really good resource. Obviously relatively new. It's less than a year old, but I do think that potentially this could have a really good implementation within the classroom, especially with this digital online learning platform, and obviously having to overcome barriers with playing live, recording things, and obviously attaching them to come back. That's my kind of crash course in shared piano. I really think you should give it a go, see how it could be implemented within your teaching practice, but also just have a little bit of fun with it, have a little bit of a play about with it. I think it's got a lot of features that could be utilised, but also in that kind of differentiation way where we can break down barriers to learning by, for example, adding in notes, etc. So that's the shared piano. And again, that's obviously part of the Chrome Music Lab, which I've just closed. Sorry, apologies. And that's obviously using my little keyboard, my MIDI keyboard and touchscreen devices. Obviously, within there's certain features in the Chrome Music Lab that you'll potentially use more than others. The shared piano obviously now is at the very, very, very front. There's also this one here called Songmaker, and I've got a couple of tasks in that link that I shared with you. So that one there, the bit.ly link, the Chrome Music Lab and shared piano resources, it's in there. So in here, in the Songmaker one, in here, what this allows you to do is it allows you to have basically like a graphic kind of score based around with the boxes, etc. One thing that I have noticed is this one here follows a colour sequence or a colour pattern for each of the notes instead of it being, for example, like the piano where we've got the notes labelled on there. These notes also, I think, is it figure notes that uses the similar pattern. Boom whackers also follow the same structure and the same colour pattern as this, which I found is a really useful thing to do and a very clever and a very smart way for Google to utilise some of those music skills that we have within the classroom, boom whackers and I'm pretty sure it's figure notes, that use those coloured boxes to be able to identify a variety of different notes. In here, it obviously uses the scale system, obviously 8 boxes, 8 notes, 1 for each one, but it also allows you, for example, to put notes on top of each other and play them at the same time. Again, very similar features to what the shared piano does. You've got the option to change the different types of instruments that are there for you. You can change, for example, do you want it to sound the bottom parts down the bottom, which are kind of more the percussion, rhythmic side of things. You have the option down the bottom to change that. You have a slider bar down the bottom to go through the tempo ranges, so how fast you want this to play back, how slow, etc. And then down the right hand side, we've got different things that you can use your MIDI keyboard to add notes. So if I bring back my MIDI keyboard, at the moment, it's not using the chromatic scale, it's just using the white notes on the keyboards. Okay. Again, in settings, you've got the option to make your composition, for example, how many bars in length. So you can up this. I'm not just up to 16, it will not go any further. How many beats per bar? So each bar, if you go back, for example, is split into 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So split into quaver beats. It might be worth, for example, explaining that to pupils so they know what's happening along the way. You can also split the bars up. For example, if you don't want them to be quaver beats, you can split them into semi-quavers, for example. You can split them into groups of 3 if you wanted to do something in compound time, for example. You can change this from major to pentatonic to chromatic. So again, that level of differentiation that you have there. Again, your decision whether or not, for example, a piece of music, I remember doing a piece of music at the beginning of my career with third years that was based on the D minor scale. So, was it D pentatonic? I can't remember, something to do with D, and that was the notes that we were starting on. So I could have used Chrome Music Lab and changed which note this starts on. So I can start it on D, for example, and make it, for example, go up in the D major scale. And you can also change, for example, whether you want it to be 1 octave, 2 octaves, or 3 octaves. So being able to change those settings and those features, I think, is a really great way to allow pupils to have that bit of creativity, but also personalisation within their options. Again, you can obviously play this back. Again, you've got the option to save. It will give you the link, and it also allows you down the bottom to embed the code, for example, into a Google site. If you wanted to have a shared area where pupils are able to share and celebrate work of other pupils. You also have the option to download the MIDI or download the WAV file, which I think is a great thing to do. So by downloading the WAV file of this one, save straight to my desktop. And again, another way for pupils to save their work and upload to either Microsoft Teams or Google Classrooms for assessment purposes, for example, or just to show that their work that they've completed. In the Chrome Music Lab, in this document, or the documents that I've given you out here, I've talked about a few things. So in here, for example, there's a task that I created way back at the beginning of the first lockdown. And what I asked them to do is I gave them a little video. It's the first time they've used the platform. So I gave them a video about how to talk through what is Chrome Music Lab, how do I get into it, how do I access it, what do I do with it. Also, for example, I said you need to use the Google Chrome as your browser if you're on a computer or a laptop to be able to get the best features out of it. But the written instructions were also there. I talked about them in the video. They were on the Google Classroom stream. They were also in the Google Classroom instruction tasks. So there's a couple of ways, like Ian was saying, about giving pupils the options to understand the tasks in a variety of different ways. I attached the song for them. I asked them to guess the song. So I think this one, if I'm right, yep, is Happy Birthday. So in here, I've asked them to guess the song, and I've actually asked them to extend it. Can they finish it? It was only a part of the song that I managed to give them. I then asked them to enhance the song. So could you add more to the music to make it sound better? Can you experiment by adding in a drum kit part? So that was by using the 2 bottom bits and the on-beat and off-beat rhythms that we've done, using the circles, which were the bass drum, and the triangles, which were the hi-hat. When you're finished, click Save, copy the link, go back to Google Classroom and click Press Add. So that's one of the tasks that I gave them, to try and get them to think about, the distance between the notes, etc. They knew nothing about what note it started on, if it was an E, a D, C, and A, doesn't matter. But try and get them to use their oral skills in order to be able to develop that understanding, and then obviously using the patterns along the way, and did anything repeat or whatever. So this was the task that was allocated to those pupils. And then it was obviously their next task was to finish that off by using, for example, that. And for them to think, well, that's not the right note, so that might be the right note. So trying to work it out that way, which also builds their oral skills along the way. So that was one task that's in that folder that you can use. Also, I've got, for example, in here, for example, a pentatonic composition. And in this one here, I've kind of gone that little stage further, explained a little bit more about what the Chrome Music Lab is all about. So in here, for example, lovely diagram was found off the internet because of those features that match up really nicely. Okay, yes, the colours aren't perfect, but they're more or less the same. And in here, what I asked them to do was a pentatonic composition. So using the notes of the scales, again, giving them more literacy concepts along the way, the learning intentions and success criteria, for example, rhythmic ostinato down the bottom part, 8 bars of melody, notes that are stepwise and leaping, and then obviously giving them that little bit of knowledge and understanding in here about what is pentatonic. So as much as I'm giving them a practical task, I'm also trying to get them that knowledge understanding back in. Again, this could be an asynchronous learning task, it could be a synchronous learning task. It's entirely up to you how you go about doing something like this. Again, the task was go to the settings, now a stage further, a bit more independence, 8 bars, the scale, how many beats, what notes does it start on along the way, setting up their settings. Now this also requires them to read a lot of information that's in here about what I'm setting, but really good task to work on with a variety of, kind of that interactivity kind of side of things, and for them to be able to hear straight back what they've composed without having that barrier to learning, which a lot of us tend to find is that musical literacy and the actual physical writing of music. So this could be a stage before they actually have to write out what the notes are using treble clef or bass clef or tab notation. And again here, there was another worksheet on here that I put up. Oh no, that is the worksheet, sorry, my bad. And then obviously to submit their work through Google Classroom and my email at the end. So worksheet explaining the task on Chrome Music Lab, creating a pentatonic composition. The work I think that went with it, yeah, it does. So that was the understanding music side of things. Once they'd completed the task, what was the name of the program that you created the music on? I know that seems like a really simple task for them to start off with, but the amount of people who will do this on something completely random and forget about everything else that we've ever gone through, but being able to, you know, identify what is this thing that they've used, did they find it useful, could they go back to this in future if they were doing some sort of other task. What was the note names and the colours that they used. This also might be good or beneficial for breaking down barriers to learning with pupils, especially ones with additional support needs, or who learn through a different manner, for example, colours. I know a lot of autistic pupils tend to think about colours or hear something and feel a certain way to it. So by them able, for example, being able to match up a colour and a letter, it might break down that that barrier that they might have with reading music or learning, or where is that note on the keyboard, for example. Again, link to their composition, describing what stepwise ostinato are, and then obviously two stars and a wish for the evaluation about how they found the task. So that's in there for you as well. And again, down the bottom, for example, we've got like the song maker. There's a chord activity, because I think it's really nice to be able to build things up into different patterns. So if I go back into the Chrome Music Lab, I'll need to create if I just restart and create a new one. What I tried to get pupils to think about was building things up in triads. So when we do triads, for example, in third and fourth year, I tend to find people struggle a lot. So it was nice to use the chord sequence ones to be, it's play a note, miss a note, play a note, miss a note. It's stacked on top of each other. So getting them to think about, for example, that there's 3 colours, and this is more an advanced higher task, which is also in there, but also to think about chord inversions, that it's not always in the same position. So for example, if we had an F chord, that there, for example, is quite a jump. Physically, if you look at it, it's quite a jump. So is there a way, for example, that look, there's a red coloured box, for example, that would probably sit better than jumping about the piano. And in that chord activity then here I've put in, for example, the jumps in the chords, and I would try and get them to write that out. And then I've put in, for example, that the top octave would be your melody, the middle octave would be your chords, and then the bottom octave would be your bass line if you split it into 3 octaves. And then I've given them the first 4 bars and then tried to get them to think about themselves. This was more a task for kind of National 4, National 5, when we were still thinking about having to deliver that compositional element along the way. In there's also the chords activity 2, which now thinks about, for example, how higher inversions and the second line and going back and forward and breaking up those chord patterns. Again, it's very similar, but thinking about breaking that up as an alternative or accompaniment method. There's the National 3, 4 and 5 chords task, again based on the Chrome Music Lab one for Songmaker, talking about, for example, the roots, the thirds and the fifths of the chords, getting them to identify them first and then getting them to go on to Chrome Music Lab and identify them, for example, with the colours, what notes are being used now, and then building that colour system into the task. I think that's all. Oh, there's one here. Sorry, my apologies. That's the advanced higher one that I was talking about with chord inversions, and building things up and getting them to think about changing the chord inversions for advanced higher, and then that part down the bottom, the section 4 is about inversions and mixing them up a little bit. But also in here, there's the arpeggios and the songmaker task. So in here, for example, that's a different version, which I'll talk about in a second, which bases it on the chord task and then thinking about what an arpeggio is. In the song maker, you've also got a variety of the other ones that I've not talked about, so I'll briefly talk about these ones just now. This one, quite basic, not one I tend to use a lot, but it talks about rhythms. You have 2 little monkeys, one on timpani, one on triangle, and you can move the little dots into changing different parts or rhythms and playing along at the same time. I tend to use this one for explaining that you need to move on at the end of the bar without having that gap that some pupils tend to invent when they move from one bar to the other, that they end up stop, and then they stop and then back into the rhythmic pattern. There's also, you can change, for example, which will also change the time signature along the way. So this one's in 5, I think. So you can change the time signature to explain different parts. Quite good for explaining syncopation and things off beat. Those ones are set. There's no other settings or anything that you can change for the rhythm ones. So they are quite basic. They're very limited in what you can do. Spectrogram I've used in regard to music technology. So in regard to music technology, when, for example, if I turn on the microphone, when I speak, you can see the variety of peaks that happen, when they happen, and different colours along the way. I've used that one for like sound waves and things, to discuss that when we speak, we don't always just have the same frequency, that the frequency moves along the way. You've also got ones that you can sit and draw. You can use a flute. So you can see that obviously it's picking up on higher frequencies, for example. These are all pre-recorded. So that's the spectrogram. This one I've used, and I think there's a couple of ones in the task in here for you that I gave my third years at least. The sound waves one, sorry, it's the spectrogram worksheet. So I got them to think about different volumes and what different types of sound sources and what were the sound sources like along the way. But in here, for example, when you press a note on the keyboard, what happens to the sound wave as it changes? You can obviously zoom in and it gives you a sound wave. We used this at the beginning of third year to talk about frequency and amplitude and what happens when you change the frequency of a sound or the pitch of a sound. We changed, or we did a wee task on that way back at the beginning just to get them introduced, and that was the start of their online learning into the third year music technology course. I think the sound waves one is in there. If it's not, so my apologies. There you go. That's a sound wave task that I've made up to talk about frequency and amplitude, talking about the range, what happened, describe the waveform, what happened, the comparison between the two air molecules, etc. along the way. We've also done one on the arpeggios. Now this one's quite nice, and I've used this one for building chord sequences with pupils before. Along the outside, you obviously have your major keys, and in the middle you have your minors. Now this also, for example, shows you the relationship between the relative majors and the relative minors. And across the top, if I click play, it talks about arpeggios and it plays you them back. So I would tend to start off key of C and just get pupils to experiment with, I'll go from C and I'll choose a different chord. What does it sound like? Right, so I'm just going to be a pupil and I'm going to go to G. I'm going to go to A minor. And you can play these back and forward to see which ones sound best. You can also change the pattern at the top. So an Alberti bass. It's really good kind of diagrams at the top to kind of show you that pattern along the way, and that's just a simple bit fancier. It'd also be good to show the difference between melody and harmony. And you can obviously change the tempo, change the speed for those, and you can change back from a harp to a piano. And again, there's an arpeggios and songmaker task in there to talk about the arpeggiated patterns, the 5 patterns that are there, and then to think about cadence points and different chords along the way in different keys. Now, obviously, they're only just thinking about 8-bar chord progressions, but you could use that as a skill builder for a compositional task along the way, and then which notes and things are used. You could build up their knowledge and understanding using that arpeggios feature that's in there. Kadinsky, maybe more a primary years thing, again, there's a Kadinsky task in there for you. In the Kadinsky task, it's more to do with drawings and how drawings could have different sounds. It links to the benchmarks of the expressive arts one, which I've put in there for you. Kadinsky, you can draw different shapes, for example, and you can change to different colours. Different colours have different sounds. So, for example, there's a circle. If I change to a green, and it plays you whatever pictures and things you draw. So if I draw a triangle, if I draw a square, and it, depending on where it is on the bit of on the page, will depend on how loud, how quiet, how high pitched, how slow pitched it is. And if I change the colours, it's changing the instruments. So that's Kadinsky. You've got voice spinner, which I've never particularly used. When I speak, for example, it kind of fuzzes up a little bit. I can. When I speak, for example. Yeah, and you can go backwards and forwards with it. It will drive you nuts if you do that in a classroom. Trust me, they've gone and done that themselves, and I've been speeding up and slowing down. One to do with harmonics, to do with. I mean, again, very basic. It's just talking about, you know, the lines and how much, for example, is happening. Piano roll. Again, good for something like music technology. It's also good for the examples that are in there, for example, to maybe talk about polyphonic or homophonic, or just explaining, you know, the technological development of a piano roll along the way. You can change them into sound waves if you want. You can also run your own ones. So that's the piano roll. Oscillators I've also done with music technology, to talk about the difference between frequency and amplitudes, and to talk about the different frequency hertz along the way, and what sound waves look like. I tend to stick with, it's the circle, I think, because they've got the proper sound wave diagram. There's ones to do with strings, again, just really basic. Again, nothing more that I can do with that one, I'm afraid. And then you've got the melody maker, which is kind of like a simplified version of the song maker that's there. There's nothing really much more that you can do. You can layer them on top of each other, you can push them forward and backwards. And then you've got the last one in there, which I've used again to talk about the difference between major and minor chords, and used it with that arpeggios and songmaker tasks along the way. I've used those in combination with each other. And then you can toggle off to show the difference between minor, and you can easily do a task based on that. There is lots in there, so that link that I've given you in here, that link to the Chrome Music Lab, my tutorial task is in there as well, and there's all these, for example, different types of tasks that I'm more than welcome for you to use to make a copy of, to add to your bank, or even to adapt and modify to any lesson that you'd like to do. I'm hoping that they will give you maybe a starting point for something that you could take forward. But I do think that the Chrome Music Lab and the shared piano do have a lot of functions and features that you'd be able to utilise in a classroom situation. And also, I really like that part about the interactivity side of things. I also feel that a lot of pupils tend to kind of have that building block and that gap, and sometimes a barrier when it comes to playing an instrument, and that negativity of, I can't do it. But when you put, for example, a tablet in front of them or a computer in front of them and say, here's your digital platform, for example, the shared piano, being able to give them that, I sometimes think that they don't realise that they're actually still playing an instrument, just in a different way. I really hope that you've enjoyed the session. I know that it's been a whistle-stop tour through the Chrome Music Lab and the shared piano. If you do want to get into contact with me, I'll pop my I'll pop my Twitter into the chat box for you just now if anybody wants to get in contact with me. My Twitter's Miss Rhodes Music. I'd also be really appreciated if you would use the LBL 2021 hashtag as well to tag us in any of the other events that you're involved in with the Leaders of Digital Learning today with the Tablet Academy. Again, if you've got any questions, you can either pop them into the session that's happening this afternoon, the question and answer with the panel. I think it's at 2:15. You can ask me any questions then if you'd like, or you can send me a message or tweet me at Miss Rhodes Music. I really hope that you enjoyed today's session. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.